Hey there, here. This is James Bell, lead boxing analyst for the Cold Hard Truth on Sports and host of the Boxing Source radio show every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the MRN Broadcasting Channel on Blog Talk Radio. And I'm making this video here in response to a user on YouTube, muayboran74's. I've been a subscriber to his videos for a little while, and he has some good takes about the sport of boxing, which isn't necessarily what a lot of people say. He's had basically the same views that I've had in reference to how some people view the sport and how people take the stories. We don't necessarily take these stories at face value, and we don't necessarily go ahead with what a lot of the quote unquote mainstream columnists put down, because most of those columnists that are out there have an agenda, and when someone has a specific agenda to try to boost certain people, then of course you're going to get a lot more shine than maybe others do who really don't go through that path or try to sell it like it is, like a lot of people do here. So that's why a lot of people create these channels, and so shout out to muayboran74 for his channel and how he speaks on things. Also, to other people in the boxing YouTube world, such as 78 Sports TV, Dante's Boxing Nation, Boxing Ego, Fight Hype, and my man Jay Cotto with his Comeback to Boxing segment. So shout out to all of y'all, and to others that I haven't mentioned yet in the whole YouTube boxing world. But back to what muayboran has said, earlier in reference to Lomachenko and Nicholas Walters. So now we saw Lomachenko basically blow away Nicholas Walters and have Nicholas Walters quit, so to speak, or retire on his stool. And the initial reaction by me and a lot of people has been that, we didn't necessarily, expect something like this. While, we did know that Lomachenko has a lot of skill, moves around the ring laterally and, to his left and to his right, real well, and just did what he had to do. Nicholas Walters seemed like he didn't have a shot, but it didn't look like he, gave much effort. And so what muayboran74 is saying is that, Walters just basically scrapped the whole fight from the beginning. Like Nicholas Walters wasn't even motivated to step into the ring to fight Vasyl Lomachenko to begin with. And the reason for that is that if you haven't seen muayboran74's latest video here, he's saying that in the case of Nicholas Walters, he had a contract with Top Rank Boxing and Bob Arum, and that particular contract actually expired before this Vasyl Lomachenko fight. And so if y'all follow Nicholas Walters, his last fight before Lomachenko was against Jason Sosa. And in that fight against Jason Sosa, there may have been some dealings going on behind the scenes or anything like that. But one of the notable things about the fight between Nicholas Walters and Jason Sosa was that Nicholas Walters was, scheduled to defend a belt against Jason Sosa, but could not defend the WBA Super World Featherweight title against Jason Sosa because he came in there the weigh-in overweight. And so they went on ahead. They still went on ahead with the fight. The title was not on the line for Nicholas Walters. He went on and he generally just outboxed Jason Sosa for 12 rounds. However, when it came to the scorecards, the judges scored it a majority draw. So while Nicholas Walters was still there unbeaten, he does have that draw on his record. And that particular fight was the last fight under contract for Nicholas Walters in Top Rank. Now, I've had this theme when it comes to Bob Arum in Top Rank, is that he puts certain fighters ahead of other fighters that he has in his stable. And not to be controversial about it, or wait, no, it's going to end up being controversial anyway. Bob Arum for years has been really, really shady to particular fighters, and y'all know what I'm talking about. So let's get at what that's all about. Let's go back to when Bob Arum had most of the fighters that were notable under his stable in the lower weight classes. You know, around the late 90s or so. We're going to go back to the times of late 90s, I would say, maybe even, you might even go to the mid 90s. But I'm going to go to around 1997, okay? And like I said, my weight brand kind of touched at this a little bit with controversial decisions and things like that. You go into 1997, April 12, 1997, WBC welterweight championship on the line. Oscar De La Hoya undefeated against Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Now, Whitaker came in with, only one loss to Jose Luis Ramirez. That was a split decision loss. So you could say that was even debatable if Ramirez actually got that win. But after that, Whitaker went through a string of wins. He was, one of the best pound-for-pound guys in the sport. Defensive wizard, defensive genius. A lot of people like. However, before that fight against Oscar De La Hoya, there was also another controversial decision that Whitaker was involved with. And that was against Julio Cesar Chavez, who was at the time 87-0. And that fight, it looked like Whitaker pulled out the win. However, the judges made it to where it was a majority draw. So, even though, Whitaker came in as a WBC welterweight champion, they didn't want to necessarily give the win to him over Julio Cesar Chavez. They didn't want to make him be the guy to actually stop Chavez's streak at the time. So that ended up being a controversial decision there. But now let's go back to that fight against Pernell Whitaker, and Oscar De La Hoya. Okay. Now, if y'all remember that fight, Pernell Whitaker showed that Oscar De La Hoya was not quite there yet as the what he became as the Golden Boy. Even though he did defeat Chavez back in 1996. But then he moved up to welterweight to fight Pernell Whitaker after, having the WBC Super Lightweight Championship and defending it once. He went in there April 12, 97 against Pernell Whitaker. Now, that was Oscar De La Hoya's first fight at welterweight. And it was basically a instance where Whitaker kind of made Oscar De La Hoya look confused at times. In that he basically controlled most of that fight. And yet they had Oscar De La Hoya winning the fight by unanimous decision over Pernell Whitaker. Even though De La Hoya had a flash knockdown, Whitaker landed more punches, 160 jabs to 45, advantage Whitaker. But yet, De La Hoya ended up winning the fight. Now, to me, that just shows a small example of what happens there when you have somebody under top rank like Oscar De La Hoya who gets more shine than other fighters. So we're going to carry that over, okay? Oscar De La Hoya was like I say, the golden boy. But there was also another guy, under top rank stable by the name of Floyd Mayweather. Now, Floyd Mayweather was just coming up there at super featherweight around that time, but he was a guy that, was very talented and said that he was basically the best guy that Bob Arum had. And he was proving that, in the late 90s, going into 98, 99. Going into 2000, 2001, he had that fight against Diego Corrales on January of 2001. And there he basically showed that how good of a fighter he really was. But by doing that, he kind of showed that Aaron really could put a guy like Floyd Mayweather as the front man to top rank stable. But yet, he could put somebody like a De La Hoya who might not necessarily have the skill that Floyd Mayweather had and, become the number one guy. So this kind of theme carries over, over the course of the late 90s into the 2000s into now, where you have a certain fighter that Bob Arum puts atop of his pecking order over everybody else. And then there's other fighters that may be good enough to beat that top guy or much better than that top guy, but he'll never match those two guys together because he's just not interested in it. So what we have here is you have this whole thing with Floyd Mayweather that was under top rank. Never necessarily got the shine that he could have had while under top rank. And we ended up seeing that after he left top rank, when all of the guys that he wanted to fight. He ended up fighting after he left Top Rank. Okay. The Oscar De La Hoyas, the Shane Mosleys, the Miguel Cottos, and then eventually Manny Pacquiao. So it took until 2006, 2007 when he left Top Rank in order for him to fight the guys that he wanted to fight. Now let's carry this over. You have Manny Pacquiao that's been under Top Rank. Okay. Now we've already visited this instance where you had Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, and they've been talking about that particular fight for years to happen. But let's go to an instance where Manny Pacquiao was in the middle of a little rivalry with Erik Morales. Now, first of all, Erik Morales beat Manny Pacquiao by unanimous decision back in 2005. Now, they were on their way to having another fight, but before that second fight, Morales fought somebody else for a vacant WBC minor title. That guy was Zahir Rahim. Zahir Rahim is, he was a pretty good fighter. He came in there 26-1. Had, one loss before going in there against Erik Morales. That was Rocky Reyes in 2004. But in that fight against Erik Morales, Zahir Rahim was a guy that was hard to hit, very unorthodox. That was a bad style matchup for Erik Morales, who was basically a come-forward fighter, very linear. So Erik Morales ended up losing that fight by unanimous decision, which kind of like stole the thunder and the hype towards the second fight between Erik Morales and Manny Pacquiao. But you would have thought that Zahir Rahim would have been able to get a shot, at bigger fights after that fight against Erik Morales, but he didn't necessarily get that right off the bat. He had to wait until May of 2006 before his next fight. That was against Vasyl Lomachenko-Nicholas. And in that particular fight, he lost by split decision. May have to revisit that fight to see what necessarily happened, to see if that split decision was merited for Popo Freitas to get that win. But there was like another example of a fighter with a specific style that was a bad style matchup for, guys that quote unquote have that action style, that are, right, that get right into your face, that fight, where you might see a knockout or whatever it is, and kind of like stops the momentum of those type of guys. So that's another one. Now, in order to like fast forward and everything like that, because really don't have necessarily all that time to go through every particular example. A couple of the guys that that are under top ranks, that were under top rank stable, that really didn't get as much shine, that probably was good or fairly good, or had some type of skill that didn't necessarily get as much shine under top rank stable. I would say is Joshua Clottey is another one that kind of was able to be a welterweight champion but didn't necessarily get the benefit of the doubt in certain fights. He was able to get the vacant IBF welterweight championship in 2008, and then went up against Miguel Cotto and had a split decision loss against Miguel Cotto, and then was put up there against Manny Pacquiao for a unanimous decision loss. So it kind of, to me, it kind of like goes into this whole little theme of Bob Arum over the past 10 to 15 years, almost been 20 years now, where certain fighters he doesn't necessarily give enough shine to. And this thing with Nicholas Walters and how Bob Arum has treated Nicholas Walters is kind of similar to how Bob Arum treated Guillermo Rigondeaux. And the reason why I bring those two guys up is because Nicholas Walters and Guillermo Rigondeaux have one thing in common. They beat Nonito Donaire. And if y'all remember, with Nonito Donaire, that was the Filipino Flash. He went through a string of wins ever since his third professional fight. And, he got a lot of, notoriety. They were trying to pit him up as the next Manny Pacquiao. And yet there was this, guy with a extensive amateur pedigree and Guillermo Rigondeaux. And then it was like, I think Arum had been very reluctant to match Donaire up with Guillermo Rigondeaux. And when he finally had to make that happen, because both of them had versions of the Super Bantamweight Championship, Guillermo Rigondeaux basically took Nonito Donaire to school. With the exception of the flash knockdown that Donaire scored on Rigondeaux, it was basically a shutout victory for Rigondeaux, and it almost looked like they tried hard to give Nonito Donaire the benefit of the doubt with some of the judges there. It was one person had it 7-5, but other than that, it was like 8-4 and a 9-3. But one of the notable things about what happened after the fight was what Bob Arum was saying after that, and that was that the style of Guillermo Rigondeaux wasn't necessarily marketable in his opinion. And so he's kind of like already putting it out there that he's shutting out those types of fighters that fight like the style of Guillermo Rigondeaux, which was not much different than what Floyd Mayweather did, which was not much different than what Pernell Whitaker did, which is not much different than what Zahir Rahim did in the past, that were all under Bob Arum in Top Rank. And so by doing that, he nearly shut out the interest of a guy that had a very extensive amateur pedigree, that was a Cuban boxing champion that a lot of, boxing fans wanted to see. And so instead of pitting him up against fights that he could have had, like against Vasyl Lomachenko, he turned around and he matched Rigondeaux up with Joseph Agbeko. And then after that Agbeko fight, it was a good little while before Rigondeaux could have fought anybody else. And then he didn't get the big fights that, he was looking for. He was looking for those fights against the other belt holders that were there in the division and couldn't get them. And what they ended up doing was they ended up fighting other people. I mean, the biggest example is Carl Frampton, who went on ahead, instead of fighting Guillermo Rigondeaux, went on and fought Scott Quigg. And then when he fought Scott Quigg and then won against Scott Quigg, instead of staying there in the super bantamweight division, he went on up and fought Leo Santa Cruz. And so with those type of things happening with Guillermo Rigondeaux, he ended up leaving Top Rank himself. And so now here we are with this thing with Nicholas Walters, where yet again he beat Nonito Donaire by knockout on 2014, and that was in the middle of his contract with Top Rank. And you gotta remember, Nonito Donaire is still a guy that Top Rank wanted to put out there and market. And so when you do something like that and then beat Donaire by TKO, basically putting him out, then you shouldn't be surprised that, Aaron might, pull the stuff that he's pulling against Nicholas Walters, just like he did against Guillermo Rigondeaux. So after that fight with Nonito Donaire, he fought Miguel Mariaga. He got the unanimous decision over Miguel Mariaga, and then that Jason Sosa fight. And went into that Jason Sosa fight, came in overweight, outboxed him, and then they couldn't even give him the win there. And then he was looking for that opportunity to fight a Vasyl Lomachenko ever since the beginning of 2016 here. And they wouldn't put it together. And yet, when they did put it together, he only got paid $300,000, not $500,000 or whatever people are saying, but only $300,000, and was basically probably getting an earful from Top Rank and the whole company there. It was I guess it would be a one fight extension or whatever it is, but I guess Bob Arum was reluctant to give him that shot. And then when he finally got that shot, it probably would have been it probably was under Top Rank's terms. It probably was under Lomachenko's terms or anything like that. So it was almost all right, Nicholas Walters, this is what we got. We got $300,000 against Vasyl Lomachenko in the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. Take it or leave it. And it was almost like he had no choice but to take it. And the way that he was treated, I guess he wasn't motivated to go into this fight, to go all out in this fight, because if he went in there and he beat Lomachenko, then he might have gotten the same little treatment that he would have had against Nonito Donaire. So he just said, bump this, man. I'm going to just take this $300,000 and run. I mean, I'm not going to get, a full $300,000, so might as well just get what I could get and run. And just be done with it. Try to sign with somebody else and just, be finito. Because it's not like, he could have a full effort and then win or lose, he'll get more opportunities. It didn't look like he was getting what he wanted to get, in this 5-fight contract with Top Rank. So he's like, well, might as well just go on ahead and get this over with. And so now you have Lomachenko, who is a very, very, very great fighter. But he was going up against a guy, Nicholas Walters, that really didn't want to, engage. Yeah, we know that Lomachenko is very good, but can you really convince yourself that Nicholas Walters was fully in the fight? if you look at it again. It wasn't that, not only Lomachenko won every round, it was like Nicholas Walters really didn't do what he wanted to do in that fight, or what he could have done in that fight. So it kind of like seems like he wasn't fully into it. And we've seen some examples of this in various fights. But here, this is the latest example of a guy that was kind of like tired of what was going on with him under the promotional company he was currently in. If his promotional contract was over with that company, then he just wanted to see if he could get this fight, get the money, and run. So, to me, I kind of see where muayboran74's says that, Nicholas Walters probably really didn't care that much about this fight. He just wanted to get the money that he could get and be done with it.